Well, it's the Tactics Meeting podcast, and we have a great topic today: how to leverage artificial intelligence in emergency response. Our guest, Cris Ippolite, is an expert. I've worked with him for many years. You're going to love this, so stick around. This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by Portage-based Solutions, makers of Easy 213. They have been helping a variety of firms in our industry with custom application and database development for close to 15 years. Well, it's time for the Tactics Meeting, the program where we talk to subject matter experts about response, tactics, and technology. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, and today I'm super excited to have with us Cris Ippolite from iSolutions. Hi, Cris.
How you doing? Hey, glad to be here. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. This is going to be exciting. And this is for all of you listeners, this is going to be a little different because Cris is a software developer, a trainer, and an artificial intelligence expert. And today we're going to talk about how we can integrate artificial intelligence, these large language models that you keep hearing about, ChatGPT, and I know Microsoft has its version. What's
Google
Facebook's
has
Llama?
Yeah, Llama. Facebook has Llama. Google has Gemini. Microsoft has the OpenAI, GPT. Everybody's got one, so they're pervasive in the technology world right now.
But people keep talking about it. Some people are afraid of it. Some people are excited about it. Some people have never heard of it at all. And I want to explore how we might use this in emergency response to help improve our communications, improve our ability to manage data, to make faster decisions, to make maybe better decisions because we have access to data in a way that we've never had it before. So, Cris, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. This is my favorite topic to talk about, and I am particularly interested in the applications in emergency response due to some work we're doing with clients and some other. I spent most of 2024 thinking about this, so I was so thrilled to hear when you reached out to be part of this conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm super glad that you were able to join us. I hear you're doing some work with the fire department in Texas. I look forward to hearing about that.
Yep.
I think the thing to do, though, is to take a step back for those who are unsure. Can you give us a definition that we can use of artificial intelligence? What do we really mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's an important place to start. So first of all, the concept of artificial intelligence has actually been banted about since the 60s, or actually arguably since World War II, which many say was the reason that the war ended was because of the Alan Turing, right? So Alan Turing created the first artificial intelligence. He created the first computer, right? And that was considered artificial intelligence. There's even some news clippings of some discussions from some MIT laureates who in the late 60s who were talking about artificial intelligence. But what we're talking about today in 2020 and beyond is specifically technology that really came about in 2017 called large language models. These are like cloud-based, in a lot of cases, cloud-based, or you can actually download them locally. Models that you can send information to and have it transform that data somehow, or you can even just ask questions of it, and it has some latent intelligence built in to answer those questions. So today, what 9 out of 10 of these headlines are talking about when they're talking about AI are large language models like GPT from ChatGPT, for example, is one of those large language models.
Now, are they actually intelligent like we would think of intelligence? Well,
Yeah,
I guess you'd have to start asking yourself for a definition of sentience, which I don't know that anybody can really agree on, but
well, it's funny. We absolutely did not prepare that question, and I will tell you, the big discussion is, so there's a term of AI, and then there's this AGI that people are talking about, which is artificial general intelligence. And when you hear about the system has become self-aware or the sentience thing, they're not talking about AI they're talking about AGI, this future hope or this future imagination of what the level of intelligence could be for these models. Now, here's the thing, to your point, there is absolutely no common accepted criteria to determine when these models have general intelligence or when they've become sentient. So they are not currently now. I can tell you that for sure. And some of the biggest minds in the industry all align with that. But the idea is what's going to happen in the future. Like when do we get there? Now, what's absent is any kind of measure that says when we've gotten there. So for anybody to predict like when the machine will become self-aware, you have to first have a criteria about what self-aware means, and that's all over the place. There's absolutely no unified accepted criteria for that at all. It's yet to be determined.
Do you think it falls into the category as I don't know what the criteria is, but I'll know it when I see it?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely will. I think what everybody agrees on is the G, the general, means that you can't have a model that just really knows one thing or is really good at one thing. It can basically, just like a human can, how we can respond to many different topics, or we can respond visually or verbally or something like that. Like it has to have the ability to do those things, but at what level of intelligence, that's certainly open for debate. But also I feel strongly, and so do a lot of great minds in AI. I'm not necessarily one of them. I'm just saying I subscribe to what way smarter people than me say, and they all say this isn't going to be something that just appears one day. Like we're not going to wake up one Monday morning and they're like, it's become self-aware. Like just like evolution and the development of the human brain and organic intelligence took literally millions of years for us to grow these parts of our brains to solve these different problems. We're not saying it's going to take millions of years, but it gradually gets to a certain point. It's not that there's going to be this event and we cross the threshold of AGI and all of a sudden, oh my God, here it is. But that's all the future. I think people get too mired in that and they ignore what's happening today and what the capabilities are of these AI models today.
The the best science fiction stories, they just wake up, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Ender's Game.
Ooh,
Uh,
that's actually a good reference. Yeah, I think
uh,
the Jaws, like I don't think as many people would be afraid of sharks if Jaws never came out, right? And I also think that most of the discussion about the doom of AI wouldn't really be something we talk about if not for the Terminator series, for example, right? So but Ender's Game, there's all
well,
sorts of fascinating
and The Moon
cultural
is a
reference
Harsh
points.
Mistress by Robert Heinlein. I don't know if you're a science fiction fan, but one day the supercomputer on the moon just said hi to his technician, and we're
Well,
off to the
well, it
races.
actually, I'll add also the uh 2000 Space Odyssey,
Oh,
2001 Space
Hal.
Odyssey. Hell, the whole like I'm not going to open the bay doors, right? That whole like moment that happened is also something that I think people point to culturally as to this awakening. So, I think so. In short, we will have to have a common definition and accepted definition of what that means, and there's no way it's going to sneak up on us because in order to train these models, it just costs so much. Like it literally, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars to even train a model. And then sure, amazing things happen, but just the fact that we need compute and cost to be able to get there, that indicates that there's a stepped level of intelligence to get to this moment that happens. So I think it'll be more gradual than people expect. I know it will.
So we want to find out how can we take advantage of what's there now and prepare ourselves to take advantage of what's there in the future. I've been using ChatGPT, the $20 a month paid version now
Mhm.
for many, many months. I use it every single day. And I'm going to tell a quick story about how I used it on one response. I needed to write a plan for dealing with the cutting of a pipe on a potential environmental spill. And we had a meeting where uh, a half a dozen contractors all put input in, from the crane operators and the people who were going to do the pipeline cutting to the environmental people to the regulators, about how we would go about doing this. And I had to take all this information and put it into a plan that was then going to get approved by the unified command, by the regulators, before it it could actually be enacted on, and they really wanted to be able to enact on it either that evening or the very next morning. And I looked at this and thought, "Oh, this is gonna take me." I mean, I'm gonna be up all night doing this. I've got all these notes and stuff. I'm like, "Hey, what could Chat GPT do for me?" So I literally uploaded into Chat GPT, and by upload, I mean you just drag a PDF and drop it in its little box,
Yep.
and it uploads it. And then I added the previous incident action plan. I added a few things into. I gave it some information to work with, not information that it would have to go out and look at on the internet, but information that I had. And I said, "Hey, take this information and organize it into the form of a plan. And this plan should be in four sections. I need a cut team, a lift team, a fire watch team, and a pollution mitigation team. And aside from the notes, include any best practices that might be required by OSHA, the state of Oregon, or the state of Washington. And I gave it some CFR and some Washington Administrative Code information. And damned if it didn't get me 80% of the way there on its first try. So then I'm like, this is great. I took it all, I dropped it in a Word document, did a little editing, cut a section from the document, dropped it back in, and said, okay, now edit this, remove
There you go.
redundancies, edit it for clarity, make it as concise and clear as possible, use plain language. So I grabbed that back from it, dropped it back in. I did that section at a time. Then said, all right, here's the completed document. Review it for errors and provide any other recommended actions. And it actually came up with a couple other things to include that were needed but hadn't occurred to me. And so I made some other edits. Start to finish, plan, cover page, ready for signature, hour and 40 minutes.
Amazing.
Unbelievable.
Th
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and by the way, there's so much, like, really positive stuff to unpack from that anecdote. The first thing I think, if we look at that, is that you were providing information as well, right? So I believe that the number one misconception for those that even know what these things are is that it's like an alternative to Google where you ask it questions and it comes back with the answer. Now, don't get me wrong, I personally use it for that all the time. I haven't Googled things in a long, long time. I ask of this data set. And the reason that that's effective for the most part is that the amount of data that large language models were trained on is essentially everything that's been publicly available on the internet ever. Like, there's these organizations, official organizations, that scrape everything that's been on the internet. Google has the ability to do it too, just from indexing for Google search. And they take all that information and they train a model to not index. This isn't a database. It's not. We're not retrieving information from it. It's teaching it these concepts. So it's taking a bunch of things that humans have written on the internet about certain topics and teaching these models what these things are. Now, when it comes to one of the things that you mentioned, was you were asking it for procedures and documented policy or protocol. All that type of information is, it's perfect for that. That information lives in these models, and it knows that information because it actually has the original documents. It has OSHA's documents in its training set, so it knows how to respond procedurally. So, use cases like you just described, where it's like well-documented procedures or compliance or policy or whatever it may be, those are perfect examples of this. So I'm not surprised to hear that it embellished your information. But the key there, I think the biggest takeaway is you provided a bunch of information and asked it to, essentially transform that using its powers to be able to speak the language or write the language. And that's where the language in the large language model part is so important here. So that's probably the first thing that people should understand, is these things have superpowers in speaking to humans, writing, and understanding and deciphering language. That's their number one top skill.
I think people might be concerned, well, hey, I've got this information. I want it to be able to read it and help me produce an iterative product, but hey, this is our private business information,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Am I giving this to OpenAI or to Google? Is it going to become part of its training set? I think that's going to be
Yeah.
a concern.
So the answer is when you're using ChatGPT or, whatever the free public interfaces are to these models, they are saying that this can become part of their training data for future models. But let's talk about what that means. So when you just uploaded all that information, does that mean that when GPT-5 comes out, that people will be able to say, "Hey, what was that information that Dan put in? And I want to know exactly what that was." No, the information again is not being stored. It's being used to train it and give it future intelligence. And really it's actually storing the questions versus the responses you got to try to improve alignment, meaning like, is it giving the human what the human wants? Now, that's just if you use ChatGPT. Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, testified in front of Congress even that yes, that information is available for training, but if you use APIs, which is what all of our projects use, we make for non-technical folks, that's just how we communicate with models or other applications, and we can do that in a very secure fashion. And these models have secure, compliant, like government cloud versions, SOC 2 compliant, ISO compliant, fit within HIPAA workflows. You can have versions of those models that do that. In those cases, your data is as secure as it is when it's being stored locally within your own infrastructure. So there is a way that that tons and tons of people are already doing on a regular basis now that is very secure. So, not, just to say, there is some risk if you're using the public facing ChatGPT, but if you're using the corporate versions or the APIs, your information is safe as it would be communicate with any other API, frankly.
So let's talk about how we might use this in an emergency, how a fire department or a police department might use these models. I've got a lot of information. I've got a lot of people on my response. I've got a lot of equipment I need to keep track of. I'm generating action plans along the way. But there isn't really, at least not in my possession, a tool that says, hey, here's AI for emergency response. How
Yeah,
might we go about this?
yeah, I think, well, first of all, the gateway into AI for a lot of organizations, including, we work with public sector emergency response, like you mentioned, and the first thing we did for them was allow them easier access to the data that they already have. So they have databases with, transactional information, encounter information, and then they have repositories of tons of documents and policies and manuals and procedures, everything from maintenance that they're performing on a fire truck to what is a procedure when we encounter this type of event, right? And those are all in documents right now. So just to make it easier and more frictionless for their users and the people who need that information to get at that information, that's the first place that a lot of organizations, including emergency response, starts with. So just the easiest way that we can get to information is by, as humans, doing it the same way we talk to other humans. Ask that for that information. So being able to chat by typing in, or as we saw in recent releases, talk to these models and have it transform our voice into text and input and have it respond in voice, that's the easiest way to get at information. So to me, that's where all organizations start, and where emergency response should start when they're thinking about it too. That's just like the tip of the iceberg, but that is the most obvious way to turn tons and tons of documents or difficult to find information into something that's really easy for them to get access to.
Are you uploading documents as uh, PDFs? Are you building the out databases that you have to then store their data in? How are you making it available to the large language model?
Yeah, so glad you asked. So first of all, we philosophically for us and for a lot of people building in the AI space, it's important not to disrupt whatever their workflows are right now or whatever mechanism they're using. If they already have a database or they already have a document repository, great. Keep doing what you're doing. We don't want to have to introduce a whole new way of interacting with that stuff, but allow AI models access to that data, again, in a very secure, lockdown fashion. And so once you do that, like when you can say, normally a person would go into this database and go search around for like what the maintenance logs were on a fire truck or something like that. You can allow the model access to it where you can define to the model, hey, in this database, this is the kind of information that you'll find. And if you ever need to solve a problem related to maintenance logs, this is where you can find it. Right. So that way, in an application where they're having a chat and they're saying, um, I'm working on this truck. How do I change the oil on an apparatus? Right. It will tell them, oh, okay, well, here's the steps to changing the oil on this specific apparatus because they have a document stored somewhere in their document repository that tells them how to do that. So instead of going through that document and figuring it out or printing it out into a binder, they can actually just ask it and it'll tell them. But in the same conversation, they can go, by the way, when was the last time that we changed the oil on this apparatus? And now it knows to go look into a database where that information, those transactions have been logged. So long story short, giving the large language models access to your data securely is the answer to how we make those available. So you don't, in those experiences, you don't have to do any uploading or anything like that. It has access to everything that you would go to generate a PDF or export a spreadsheet anyways. So you just have it go right to the source in that case.
Could I then have it sounds interesting. Could I have it, like, audit my maintenance? Like, "Hey, take a
Oh,
look at the last 5 years of maintenance records compared to the manuals, and give me a list of everywhere where we were either late or we're out of spec," or, because I'm thinking about
absolutely.
during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we had some, skimmers well, they got a lot of heavy use during that kind of thing, and it turns out on this particular skimmer, they're like 65 Zerk fittings for greasing the device. But over time, as new employees were hired and people got trained, people lost track of where some of these Zerk fittings were, and it turns out, while when it was new and you got trained by the manufacturer, you greased all 65 of them, but 10 years later, you're routinely greasing 45 of them, right? Or less. And and if what you've done is logged, be like, "Hey, where are we out of spec?"
Yep. It's a absolutely perfect example that you just provided. So the not only does it have access to information, but it has a level of processing and a sort of a higher level of reasoning that humans just can't achieve. Like if I said to you, "Hey, here's 50,000 maintenance log transactions. Can you read through these and make note of certain patterns?" That would take you hours, if not days, to be able to do that. Just we only have so much like comprehension available in our brains. But these models have the ability to do those things in a matter of seconds, for example. Like you can actually evaluate, like there are models out there that we work with for some of these things that have what's called a token length. And we'll try to stay out of the weeds on the technical stuff, but one of the more fascinating things is the capabilities of what they can process. So token lengths, right now there are some models that have access to 1 million tokens. What is 1 million tokens? 1 million tokens is 750,000 words. So imagine being able to ask in a chat environment a question that is somewhere in 750,000 words or look at that as data. Imagine how 750,000 words worth of data or maintenance transactions, and within 3 seconds you can get an answer to those things. Imagine then if you start giving it additional tasks in a little bit of reasoning to say like which ones are the ones that are most likely that would fail, or what might they look like if they fail, or give me the profile of where one of these things have failed in the past and what of mine are closest to that because of the maintenance logs or the data that I've provided to it. That's just something that humans can't do. So you could do one of two things: go hire 25 researchers, or use these models. I mean, that's really what your choice is to be able to solve problems like that.
Reminds me of, the, law drama that I like, Suits, where they've got, the whole bullpen full of interns, right?
Oh
Like,
my
first
god.
year associates, and you've had, 100 boxes of documents arrive for discovery, and you're trying.
It's my favorite metaphor. First of all, my wife loves the show Suits, or at least one of the actors on Suits, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. But that trope, that movie trope where they go, "Okay, defense, here we're going to roll in a truckload of documents that you have to now perform discovery on before Friday, before
Yeah.
recess, when we come back from recess. And if you don't have it done by then you're hosed, right? Now, bring it on.
Right.
Give me a truckload of data, and AI will be able to do that. As a matter of fact, in law, I've worked actually very closely with a handful of law firms as it pertains to law, and I can tell you for sure, if you're in document law or contract law, I, basically, I would think about retirement at this point. Like an excellent example, which I can be practical about, is we had a new customer who wanted to onboard us, but we had to like they had somebody that was outgoing within their organization. And so we only had access to this person for like 3 days before they were gone. So we needed to do a knowledge share like by a certain date, right? And at the same time, that group was wanted us to sign like these IP agreements and these NDAs before we could talk to that person because we're about to get, all this knowledge. They weren't doing it deliberately, but unfortunately, they didn't get us back the IP contract, which was, 50 pages long, until like 2 hours before our call. So what I did is I put it into our AI system and I said, evaluate this contract and tell me where my company would be exposed. And it pulled out like 5 things, three things I didn't care about. And then another one was essentially something that said like in like there's some nuance to it, but it said whatever tools and techniques that I use while I'm working with them are now property of this company. And I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that. Like I'm bringing my own techniques in. So I say back to the model, I have a problem with those things and here's why. Can you suggest more appropriate language that would suit me? And it came up with like the exact language. So within like 6 minutes, I fire back to the contract people. I have a problem with this thing on this page. Can you change it to this language? And they go, wow, okay, sure, we can do that. And then we're like minutes before the call started, and they send me back the revs, and I just say I went into the AI and I said, "Here's the original contract, and here's the one they just sent me. Here's what my concerns are. Can you tell me whether or not the language that they changed solved it?" And it goes, "Yes, it could." So I literally within like a minute go signed. Here you go. And that's normally how we all sign contracts, but I signed those knowing that I did not now just expose myself into a major IP situation, which would have been very detrimental to my service offerings after that point. So that from a document processing standpoint, like that's what we can do these days. You can write up contracts and revise contracts and evaluate documents and all that type of stuff from a law standpoint in manners that are just mind bending. So that whole discovery trope, bring it on. Give me a million documents in an hour, and I will find exactly what the needle in the haystack that we're looking for there.
Right. I would give some more examples, but I don't want to share all my secrets with all my listeners. Go figure it out. It's important. Uh, did I write it? Yeah, you tell me.
Well, and then I think the other part that I wanted to point to in the example that you opened up at the top of this discussion was that you also weren't providing a bunch of information to the language model and then just taking whatever it gave and then running with it. You were using it as drafts and you were using it in this iterative authoring manner where then you would say, oh, then take this little chunk and go rewrite it for me or go, make sure this makes sense or it's consistent. And then you can put it all back together. That took you an hour and 45 minutes, but that would have taken you all weekend, arguably, to be able to do that from scratch and to be consistent. You also mentioned having it make sure that your information wasn't redundant and that it had a certain, you could use it to have a certain tone through all that. That stuff is really hard to do for humans, even if you're really diligent and you're really invested in the process yourself. But those things can happen in minutes instead of days using these models.
In one of the earlier models, I can't remember how long ago this was. It's been a year. How long have we been really using ChatGPT?
Yeah, so ChatGPT, the thing that is available to the public came out in the end of 2022, November 28th, 2022. So by the beginning of 2023 last year, 100 million people had access to this application worldwide. Before that, the models that are behind it had been available since about 2020 via APIs and different, like they call them playground things that you could do. So in all, it's been, 4 years, less than 5 years that even the early adopters had access to all this. But the public, the ChatGPT stuff was, little more than a year and a half now at this point.
That's probably a little over a year ago. My wife's cousin is a professor of rhetoric. We
Oh,
were at dinner, and I had the ChatGPT app on my phone, and, she they somehow artificial intelligence came up, and it was, concerned about education and whatnot, but she hadn't seen it. It's like, "Okay, watch this. Hey, ChatGPT, write me a poem about a blue rabbit going down the Mississippi River in a canoe, and he meets a bear." So he wrote me a poem. I said, "Now watch this. Rewrite it in the tone of Mark Twain. Now rewrite it in the tone of Emily Bronte." And she was just blown away. And then she says, "Have it rewrite it as a haiku." I said, "Okay." And she's like, looking at the pattern, right? She goes, "Oh, oh, that's really good." I was like,
It's just it like that is I would recommend those be people's first experiences with it. Have some fun with it and see what its capabilities are. I will share my wife story with you. My wife is on the HOA in our neighborhood, and there was this ongoing dispute. And I think this could be relevant as far as policy and documentation is concerned. There's this ongoing dispute for months with some new homeowner that was building a house and whether or not they were adhering to the guidelines of the HOA, and the board members had this conversation with the new homeowner and it had been going on for months. And so it's a Friday night and I said, "Hey, let's watch a movie and, have a Friday night." She goes, "No, I got to read through months worth of an email chain and compare it to the documents and the rules and whatever and see who violated who." And I go, "Forward me that email chain, send me the rules and regulations and start the movie." And so I
right.
sat there on my iPad and within, 40 minutes tops, maybe because I was just half paying attention, I had the GPT model in that case spit out, um, this person indicated this, and they were actually quite evasive because earlier on this date they said blah blah blah, and so they actually indicated that they may have had knowledge of this one thing. And the board, oh by the way, was mistaken in this one thing because in article blah 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 da 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 of the rules it states that you're supposed to actually make this decision when the plans are sent and da da da. And at the end it said, "So in short, this is what the, results of this whole thing are." And I just forwarded it back to her and she sent it back to the board and they were like, "Oh my God, amazing. Thank you for putting in what appears to be
24
days." And
hours worth of
yeah,
work, right?
exactly.
Oh, wow.
And the beauty of it
We
is
owe
it
you a steak dinner.
that would have been great. And but what's so interesting about that is like think about what rules and regulations are. It's language. And like we talked about contract law, it's the same thing with rules. It's just we define something in language. Did this thing happen that way or not? Right? That it's like just language. So those are like rules, regulations, documentations, reviewing, determining, risk and exposure within documents are absolute slam dunk perfect use cases for these language models. And really, frankly, there should no longer be human HOA boards anymore. They should all be AIs and just like let us get on with our lives and take all the emotion out of it, right? Too, because think about, kind of lingering on that HOA case again. Everybody on the board has their own, emotion in it, whether they like the person or how it affects the view from their house or whatever the deal is. Well, when you strip all that down and it's just like Boolean logic, like, is this a violation or not? That's how like that's how language models can really excel when it comes to that type of enforcement.
Well, the other place for emergency response that I see this being of real value is in the realm of the public information officer and liaison. I have to write a press release
Oh yeah.
that covers this information, and I've got all this data that has been collected for the response, initial reports, situation reports, all these kinds of things. And it would seem to me, now I'm not a PIO, but that you could drop all these things in and then say, oh, and give it an example of a press release and say, taking the information in documents A, B, C, and D, write a press release for public consumption in the format of document E.
You nailed it. So, and when we build systems for folks, we are often not relying on the users to articulate exactly what they need. They can just say, "I need an incident report from this." Like, for example, one of the things we do is we take an audio transcript of dispatch And usually a person has to listen back to it and create the incident report, and it needs to be in this format and so on. So what we're able to do is uh, just simply upload audio, have it transcribe that into text, and then evaluate all the text as it needs to. And then, like you said, here's the format it needs to be in. We're actually supplying it there. And output that in that format. It can do that in a number of seconds. Like those, that is literally what I just described to you is something that we've done for an emergency response organization. And those are actually like, firemen, or lieutenants involved in some of these things besides just public information officers. These are individuals that could be out on calls or actually like helping the public guard public safety instead of sitting at their desk. Like talk about movie tropes. um we all know the cop that has to sit at his desk and write up the report, right? Those things can literally happen from another thing that we've done is helmet cam, like for firemen. So you have three different individuals who are all recording an incident, and then you have these like an hour's worth of video, and to have to sit and watch the video and extract it and figure stuff out like would just take forever. So much so to the point that like in the case where we've actually done this, they said, well, we just stopped. We don't even record the video anymore because there's just so much of it. We don't even know what to do with it. So we created a system for them that says, extract this specific type of information that we're looking for, compare it against our procedures and our policies and procedures, and write up a report as to what happened. But also, then we want to use this for training purposes. So tell us, give us 10 observations as to how these guys did this, or who did a good job on what, or what would be a good learning opportunity based on video inputs, right? So just to be clear, it's not just transcribing the audio and a video. These models are able to actually say, hey, they showed up at a house. There was fire coming out of the two windows off to the left. There's a pool over here with some water. We saw one person leave out of the back, and then this person was carrying an axe, and this person had an oxygen meter or whatever. Like it can evaluate vision input as well too. And so we've built systems that allow them to now process hours and hours of video that normally they just don't have the staff to be able to do, and turn that into everything from incident reports, and could potentially become a press release if need be, or just turn it into a huge log of potential training so that when they're doing training on new firefighters, they could say, for example, let's take a look at this video where this exact thing occurred and see how they responded. The amount of logging that would be necessary for that is just like beyond what they have personnel to be able to do. So, a couple of other examples with multimodal or other types of input besides just documents too.
So, will ChatGPT manage video like that?
In that case, we were using Gemini, Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro. Not that that matters, but the reason that's relevant is because it has a longer token context window. So about an hour's worth of video is about 1,000,000 tokens. So I said before that 1,000,000 tokens is 750,000 words. It's also an hour of video. So you need a longer context window. Now, ChatGPT is running just last week, is now running on a new model called GPT-4o or Omni. And that has a longer context window now too. Like one of their demonstrations is they showed that you can upload like a 30-minute video and it will turn it into notes. So the answer, yeah, I mean, ChatGPT itself, I would say go ahead and upload a, I don't know, 10-minute, 20-minute video to ChatGPT, pick the 4.0 option and ask it to transcribe it. And I think you'll see some amazing things happen even today.
Well, I'm gonna do that right after we're done recording, and I am running the 4.0 model right now.
It's so great. Yeah. And it's cheaper, faster, has the multimodal input stuff. So again, there's nothing to wait for. This technology is here. Like these tools are available today for people to solve these problems.
Well, the images that it's creating are
Yeah.
I've noticed the difference in just the last couple, even before 4.0. Just over time, it was getting better and better, although it refuses to spell things correctly in the
That's
image, and that's
yeah,
gotta
that's
be a copyright thing.
it's well, it was just hard because the thing that creates images and the thing that generates text are different things inside the model. So it was really just aligning those two things. And I will say that ChatGPT 4.0 and also some of the stuff that Google's doing, and these other models like Stable Diffusion has a new version coming out, and they've pretty much like solved for the text stuff. So in the generative image creation, yeah, you can generate some amazing stuff out of these models as well too. Not just reports or text or whatever. You can create audio. You can
Really?
generate. Oh yeah, you can um, uh, uh, turn text into audio using models that sound like humans, and that's how you can actually interact with it. As a matter of fact, and I could probably use one now. I have a model of my voice. So I
Do you
have a
really?
I do, and another trivia I'll give you is that, we were talking before about a software vendor that you and I are both aware of who had hired me to create some videos. Well, I will let you know that I, had a weekend where and I'm experiencing allergies now, which is why I can't stop itching my nose, but I had an allergy breakout weekend as well, but I had a deadline on Monday. So I had to do, like, 18 movies, but, like, my voice just was, like, just cached after, like, 10. So I did the screen clicks and I used my Cris AI voice to speak over the rest of it. And I delivered it to the customer. And I only just revealed at our conference this year, which was like a year later. Hey, by the way, if anybody listened to those, half of the videos were me talking and half were the AI version of my voice. And people were unable to, detect the difference between those two. So,
So I can deep fake myself.
yeah, as a matter of fact, there's
I don't even
models.
need to show up anymore.
Yeah, I'm getting pretty close myself. But yeah, there's as a matter of fact, not only can you deep fake, and there's a lot of different places where you can do this, but you need less than a minute of video to train on to be able to do that. Now, deep fake I like to stay away from because that's a huge topic, especially in an election year right
Right,
now.
right,
But
right.
like outputting voice is very practical. Whether it's me as a well, let me give you an example. We have a large enterprise customer that we use that has a lot of training content. So they've got like maybe years ago, someone did a training video on a certain, how to use a certain product or something, but they want to localize that for other languages. So that's a very expensive, that's a huge cost center for a lot of organizations, localization of like training content. So we're able to create a model that like takes it's an output of their system that identifies the copy that shows up on screen and as the closed captions, and we're able to send that off to a language model and translate it into the localized language and insert that text back in. Then we're able to take, if it's more than a minute long of audio, we're able to take a snippet of that, train it on the original speaker's voice, and then have that original speaker speak Spanish or French or whatever, and essentially automate the localization of that. So, like, I have a video of me speaking in like 8 different languages that's up on our YouTube channel at iSolutions AI on YouTube, and I barely speak English correctly. So it's my AI voice speaking English, and then me doing French, Spanish, German, and Italian as well. And it's all from the output of these models.
That's amazing. I'm gonna have to turn my sister onto this. She teaches Japanese at the high school level, and to uh, get her voice doing Japanese like that would be super
It's pretty
interesting.
cool. Yeah, the
What
first one
model
I
did you use to do that on?
um I was using something called 11 Labs, which I experimented with a lot. I did a lot of custom voice models with Microsoft Azure, and I tested out a bunch of other ones, but the one that I think is the leader in the clubhouse right now is from 11 Labs, spelled out the number 11. And they have an excellent model. And there's also just a bunch of them popping up now where you can do these like instant voice cloning. But if you want to check that out for yourself, check out 11 Labs. They do a really good job of that.
Okay, so tell us what you did for this emergency response organization in Texas.
So a couple of the you know, that I mentioned, being able to give them access to their data in their existing database system and documents that are stored in that database system, but also in other repositories, was the first thing that we were able to do. That helmet cam example that I gave you is, well, so a couple of the things that we talked about. One of the things we're able to allow arson investigators the ability to take like cell phone data for potential suspects and to plot it, like literally send it to AI and have AI come back with an interactive map that shows all the different plot points of the potential suspect and determine their direction of travel and be able to determine within seconds whether or not they were actually near the scene of the fire. So that was one thing that we're able to do with AI. So that's something that people wouldn't normally think is an AI type thing. You can't do that with ChatGPT, for example. Another one was take the audio dispatch of incidents and turn them into incident reports, and we're able to do those in like a matter of seconds. Um, Rather than the hours that it usually takes to do that. The helmet cam version that I told you about too, with multiple different people processing the video and turning it into a report and processing it for training, is another example of that. The thing I'm working on after we're done with this podcast today is taking a site plan for the fire marshal, having it analyze it, determine where the fire hydrants are on the map, determine based on the legend that's on the map, and say, how close are those fire hydrants to the building? And then compare that to the fire code document that's over in this other repository and determine if those are within code or not. And do that in a number of seconds rather than a number of days. So those are just a smattering of like non-text generating versions of things that we're doing in the public sector. So all that's available to do today, by the way. Like you can totally do those things today.
That is fascinating. I was just something popped into my head and now it's popped right back out again. I guess because I'm old.
Well, and by
Um,
the way, another one was the you were talking about like during a shift change where they say okay, well this is what we did on this shift, and they like they pass it off to, you know, the next lieutenant that's coming in or whatever, however they do it. We're doing a custom mini podcast that's in the voice of the lieutenant that literally they can listen to like on their drive in and hear, you know, the entire whatever they did on that shift as a summary in the voice of the actual lieutenant. So like it would be as if they called them everybody personally and told them all the information they needed to do. So those are all like multimedia examples, for example. So um, I think that's how people should think about this. Like those are some of the possibilities that are available in large language models, not just this like question answer machine thing that, or text stuff that everybody's, you know, hearing about if they've heard about it at all.
can I use these log language models then for mapping as a replacement for like the Google Maps API?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
And
the
I asked because I've got a FileMaker database that's running, and I'm starting to get some pretty big API call charges.
Oh, I can, well, yeah, I can imagine. Now keep in mind, like in that case, you can couple these language models with other tools like Python is a very common data science tool, and it's been around for ages. And so there's nothing new about that. You can really trust these, and there are tons of community support on these. That thing I just described to you is actually a Python library that ingests lat large data and produces a document that technically is the document of the whole world, like scale, you know, in a vector map that reduces down into the focal point of just the little area where you're plotting all the data, and it spits it out as an HTML page that you could publish to any kind of browser or reader. So that's not like that's like a local thing that's just rendering a document that can be read inside of a browser that happens to be a map, an interactive map for that matter.
That's interesting because what I was doing is I've got staging sites for equipment all over the country, and
Hmm.
then a location that is an incident. And there are a number of mobilization standards. The Coast Guard has the times that you need to have equipment arrive in the high volume port area, in the low volume port area. Washington State has arrival requirements in different areas. So does California. So does Alaska. And I wrote this database application that, oh, and then the Coast Guard also does regulations based on arrival times for a Great Circle. So I wrote an
That's
application that
perfect.
uh, does its own calculation for a Great Circle using the Haversine formula. And by the way, I asked ChatGPT for the script for that. Um, it came back with a function that actually wasn't a database function. I said, "Hey, you got this part wrong," and it was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Here you go." And with just the tiniest little bit of tweaking, that script ran. It was
Uh,
awesome.
Yeah, and to really focus on that statement you just made, it's really important. First of all, the discipline that you had to say, "Oh, it came back with something that was wrong. Let me tell it what was wrong," and then it tweaked it for you is a really important part of how you use these models, right? The other part is in GPT-4, which is the predecessor of the 4.0, it introduced this concept of reflection. So one of the pro tips I would give anybody that's using ChatGPT is continue to ask ChatGPT if it followed the instructions that you gave it properly and audit itself. As a matter of fact, when we're doing API integrations, we will often build in, hey, this thing you were supposed to do. And before you come back to the user and we present the results of the API call, did you do it correctly based on these criteria? And it will literally reason with itself and say, well, in order to determine that, I have to make sure I did this, 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 and this. Did I do those? Well, I did this, I did this, I did this. And so essentially show your work. And you can increase, and there's also all sorts of papers out there and everything that show that when you just use that concept of reflection, the benchmarks of intelligence are like exponential. So just working that into your ChatGPT exercises like you did, or in your API calls when you're systematizing this is a huge pro tip for getting great accuracy back from these models.
And one of the things I was trying to do, and what I use the Google or the Google Maps API call for, is to uh, get the actual road distance.
Mm.
So we're asking it for turn by turn directions, which I think is where these costs are coming from. We're asking it for turn by turn directions. It's sending back a JSON, and then all I want is the distance and the time. And the
Yep.
distance and the time, I then pull it into the database for each record for each piece of equipment that I'm moving to say, hey, this piece of equipment is leaving, Missoula, Montana, and it'll arrive in Salt Lake City. Um, and here are all the different kind of benchmarks depending on whose regulation you want to compare it to. Here's what it is. um I'm
No. The reason why you'll have a lot of success employing language models in there is that the rules and regulations and policy that you're asking for are in the model's training set. Like those things don't change that often, and even if they do, they're likely already in the training set. The other thing that's beautiful about the latitude longitude, that's something that never changes. Like literally the physical location of a building or a port, for example, likely will never change, right? And so, or if it does, it gets a new latitude, longitude coordinates, right? So, like these Python libraries, when language models have access to them, can simply do the distance math on those things very very quickly. So, those types of calculations or distance calculations are low hanging fruit for models like the ones we're describing here today.
well, that's very cool. um hmm, that's interesting. Well, do you have any last thoughts on how we might use these, some advice for people who maybe are just trying to think about it, dip their toe into this?
Yeah, what I would say is really look at the problems that you think you can solve. If you feel that, when I talk to business decision makers, I say, in what aspect of your business could you use 20 more employees, right? It's kind of a silly thought experiment, but then usually people have one or two of these things that immediately come to mind, right? And so then I go, great, well, let's take a look at it. What is it that you're trying to do? Where's the information live? How are you trying to process this? What are your goals? Is there a repeatable like outcome or repeatable format of what these things need to look like incident reports, like we were talking about earlier, or a certain contract format, like, and then those are areas that you can focus on. I would also say that if people don't even know what we're talking about with AI, they should absolutely try out ChatGPT. Start off with a poem, start off with a haiku, just understand what its capabilities are and go through that like, surprise and delight and really kind of, get some trust in how these things work and then start trying to map those to business efficiency use cases where you can start employing AI. You don't have to get into the crazy, like, helmet cam footage stuff right away. But if you just simply want to make documents or data easier for your crew to interact with, and you want to be able to have your team of 20 be able to perform at a level of 50, then those are areas where these AI tools integrated in with your existing system can actually make huge impacts.
If somebody wanted to follow some of the work that you're doing, is there a website or a YouTube
Yeah,
channel or something that they can go to?
you bet. It's all under isolutionsai.com or on YouTube or at isolutionsai or on Twitter at isolutionsai. And my name is Cris Ippolite, Crisippolite. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm extremely active, and one of the areas that I spend a lot of time posting on LinkedIn and on is like state legislation around AI and public sector use cases. So I think that'd be a pretty good follow for anybody that's listening to this podcast.
That's great. So all of you follow Cris Ippolite. I follow him. Uh, Whenever I have an AI question, I text or email Cris.
Please.
If you're thinking about implementation and you have a question, I'm sure he's happy to answer it for you.
All day. That's what I'm here for. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to your constituents. And I really appreciate this, Dan.
Thank you, Cris.
Cheers.